gosh, if you if you go to Croke Park and you see all the GAA branding, that's a project I ran. If you think about sort of Electric Ireland, when that was branded, that was the project I ran. But also down into kind of much smaller projects, and also I've done a lot of work in the charitable sector, Irish Heart Foundation, Focus Ireland, Bernardo's, lots of those. So I've got a very, very broad experience. I also spent 7 years working predominantly in the video game industry. So it's quite a broad perspective. So that's hopefully what I kind of bring today, is to kind of give you a practitioner's perspective on purpose. So I'm going to just share my presentation here and just jump straight in.
Should work. I've just made you co-host. Yeah, great.
Okay, so I'm hoping you can all see that. That's all okay? Great. So this was the kind of heading that we discussed, and it's very much I suppose it's a passion of mine. I think brand is a concept that is hard for people to really get grasp, and it's very different for different people. And I think generating a brand that is authentic to yourself is, again, a very big challenge, particularly when you have internal kind of long and short-term needs, because building a brand is a long-term vision. And the core of this kind of really is talking about purpose. And what I would like to try and do today is to kind of demystify purpose. I think that it's what I refer to as uncertain territory for a lot of people. I'm going to give you a definition of purpose from my perspective as a practitioner. And I think it's different from what you would probably find if you go and go to ChatGPT to actually ask, give me a definition of purpose. It'll give you the industry standards. I want to then think about how you make purpose meaningful, and then kind of give you some tips. And hopefully through a case study I'm going to show, you'll get a sense of how it might feel like to engage in purpose. I realize I've got my top wide open here, showing my chest, excuse me. So I suppose a pulse test, just want to ask questions to you guys. And there's a few here. Is kind of, think about it from how important is purpose.
You're just gone a bit wobbly there, your volume, David. Okay, just speak again.
As an organization.
The Italian Wi-Fi, is it?
As an individual.
David, we're not hearing you, unfortunately. Is everyone else struggling to hear David?
So can you hear me now okay?
Yeah, that's better now. Perfect. Back. I think. Speak. No. Are you speaking?
Oh, he's gone.
Oh. It's so funny. I was on to him earlier. I said, how's the Wi-Fi? Because I was doing the Charities Institute thing last week in Greece, and I was a nervous wreck. Wi-Fi just kind of comes and goes. But I tethered off my phone, and my sister was doing appointments upstairs. So the two of us were putting a lot of pressure on it. There we are. You're back. Have you had a storm, David? He said the storm.
Yeah, we've had a lot of storms. So you can hear me okay now?
Yeah, that seems to be back now. Brilliant.
You can hear me.
Hi, Suzanne.
Perfect. Yeah. It's because when I got here, I was saying, well, look, because this is not my house. This is they said that the Wi-Fi can be a problem, and I said, well, okay, I'll go to a hotel, and they said the same there. It's the storms cause all sorts of problems. So anyway, I was going through some questions on the pulse test, and I was on the third one, just saying, does your organization's purpose influence your culture? And this is something that I'm really, really keen on, because if you are going to have an authentic purpose, that is what it looks like. It influences the culture of how you work. And often, a key question is, can you describe your organization's purpose to a new employee in a way that is meaningful to them? So it's not just you have one, actually, are you able to relate it in a way that actually is meaningful? And then, if you're looking out again at all the companies, do you know of a company that has a clear sense of purpose? And how would you actually describe that? So that's just some questions just to ask you. I'm not necessarily going to sort of say we need to kind of go through all those questions, but does anybody want to kind of give me a sense of where you are in relation to purpose in your organization, or where maybe purpose might sit in your mind by way of clarity or confusion?
Jump in, I'm Emma.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, David. Emma from Helium Arts here. It's really interesting this session is happening today because we're actually relaunching a new brand today.
Oh, goodness. Okay,
Which
fantastic.
so we've been through a lot of this a process around a rebrand and we're launching a new website as well. That's the kind of phase one of it today. So we're actually, as part of that, changing our name from Helium Arts to Helium, just one word. So it was just really interesting that it's great to hear what you're talking about here, because it's reinforcing, I suppose, a lot of what we're just going through, I suppose. Yeah, so in terms of our purpose, I suppose, I mean, we have our kind of mission and vision and values and things. I don't know, is the purpose something that should be additional to those? Or I was just wondering what, like, should that be a written down piece or?
I think it's a fantastic question, Emma, and it's kind of and that's something which will be addressing, because I think that when you go through branding process, of course you have to have your vision, and that really much be should encompass your purpose. You know, and the mission is really, well, what are we doing in service of that vision? So I assume you've been through that whole process. But it's interesting that and something I was saying to Julie earlier on is that there's a big difference, I think, in defining purpose for a corporation or defining purpose for a charity. And a lot of charities kind of have a sense that actually, well, surely our cause is our purpose. Um, and but the fact is that, whether you're in the children's space or the mental health space or whatever it is, there are tons of other organizations in that space too. And you need to be able to tell people, well, what is it that you do specifically that is different from everybody else, or that is unique to yourself? And that's the whole point of having, having a sense of that purpose defined. So that's a key thing, I think, to think about from a charitable perspective, is the fact that you need to be able to know within the space that you're in, how do you define what you specifically do so people can fully understand it. I
And is
assume
it maybe thinking about your any unique selling points or what's different or
yeah,
special about you?
yeah,
Is
yeah.
that, does that fall under that as
Yes,
well?
it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And it's like if you were to say ask somebody who knows you, well, what is it that Helium do? Um, they should be able to very quickly be able to say, boom, because it should be reinforced in everything and how you communicate through your name, through your tagline, through all of your communications, through how you structure your organization and deliver services. All of that should be very clear, defined as into what your purpose is. Does anybody else have a kind of perspective on purpose from their organization? Because if not, I'll just carry on and we can ask questions as we go. Okay.
Thanks, David.
I mentioned uncertain territory. This is kind of where I think purpose is. And it was interesting having that conversation with you, Emma, as well, because you've been through it. And for a lot of people, they're uncertain as to what it is. Okay. And what I see is there's a lot of hype. Everybody says you have to have purpose, and there's articles and books written on purpose and all sorts of stuff. A lot of practitioner jargon, and I would be guilty of that myself many times. There are a lot of organizations out there who actually sort of are purpose washing. And I think what I encounter when I'm sort of talking to people is purpose fatigue. They've heard enough, they've kind of, it's, I think there's a disconnection going on because they see it as being something that is about marketing and not about actually brand and how you're being. Okay. And we kind of instinctively know that purpose is important. But many businesses don't know where to start. I think that's a key issue. I'm just going to close the door here, some background noise. Just bear with me 1 second. That's it. I'm here in a villa with 18 people, so it's like it can get a little bit noisy. Trying to find a place that there isn't going to be a noise. So here are some challenges. I think, as I kind of work with organizations, humanity versus business. Okay. Um, you know, we're social beings, we're emotional beings. Our customers are social and emotional, but businesses are not. They're more, I mean, there is a lot of emotion in business, but businesses are risk averse, analytical, they're in competitive worlds. And these things, humanity versus business, these things have to coexist if you're going to build a brand. You have to have humanity in your brand. You can't be all risk averse and kind of analytical. And this is a challenge I find an awful lot when we're trying to build strategy, because sometimes, because the humanity aspect of your brand, is emotional. It sometimes doesn't trickle up into high strategy space. It exists in the promotion space, and that's a real challenge I find working with organizations. And I mentioned earlier on this whole marketing versus purpose piece, I took part in a podcast last week, and the podcast was all about marketing versus purpose. And I was actually quite amused by the whole idea that they shouldn't be versus. But of course, on a day-to-day basis, they're talking about, well, actually, we have to sell, we have to meet our numbers, and how does that affect the purpose that we have as an organization, the sort of the big promise, the overall, and our vision. And these things must coexist. And a lot of people. The other challenge, I think, is very much is around definition, and this is a definition which ChatGPT pulled up for me, and it's one which I've seen many times. And I think that whereas when I read this, I get it.
Oh, this is not going well.
Oh,
you're back, David. I think maybe David
Sorry,
turned your
guys, did I
camera off.
disappear there?
You did. You disappear. You're jumping in and out. The
Turn
volume.
my camera off. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe. You might need to share screen again though. That's gone off. No, wait.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me stop share. My apologies, guys. This is the
world.
We had an
of a
hour-long
digital
session
nomad.
yesterday, and then perfect.
Perfect. Don't worry.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so I'm just going to share again. Okay, so are you seeing that?
That's coming up. Thanks, David.
Yeah, my apologies, guys. Yeah.
no worries.
So yeah, and there's something just coming back to this this piece here is that the there's a conflict in this between, I think, the why you exist, and then the societal and human value piece. And this is something I think that, I see a big difference between core purpose and your societal purpose. I see them as two separate things, although they tend to get pulled together because a lot of organizations like Patagonia, have a purpose that is societal, and it's part of their core. You look at the likes of Dove, and Nike. These are purposes that have come out of marketing.
I think it's gone again, David.
They
I'm
want
sorry.
to position themselves differently. Dove was, they did something that percentage of women she kind of work on. Okay.
Can you guys hear David? No.
Okay, bear with me a second.
All right, maybe if the closer to the box. Sorry.
I've got to relocate. Just give me 1 second.
No worries. This was my fear last week when I was doing it.
Oh dear.
It went fine actually in the end. It was okay.
Oh, good.
I had to tether from my mobile.
Yes.
This flies just so up and down in these countries. We don't realize how lucky we are.
Yeah. Although parts of Ireland can be pretty bad.
True.
Parts of the UK, I was there on my holidays, that was very patchy and
You weren't working, I hope, Emma, were you?
No, I wasn't. No.
Okay.
Good.
Is this any better, guys? And
That's better. Yeah,
Yeah,
much better.
much.
Thanks, David. Sorry about this.
no. Look, this is the world we live in. So I was talking about sort of Dove and Nike. I mean, you know, both of their purpose statements have come from marketing. Okay, and that is something which, you know, is very difficult for small businesses to kind of emulate. And this is, I think, a challenge, is that a lot of the brands that we use when we start talking about purpose bear very little resemblance to the people we're speaking to. None of these three organizations bear any resemblance to who you guys are. And so therefore, you know, not only is the language we're using, the definition of purpose, and now also the kind of the case studies that we're using, none of them are aligned to actually who we're speaking to. I think this is a real challenge. Okay. And I think this is all, you know, a barrier to building brand strategy and building a brand that actually is authentic, which is what I kind of mean when I say a brand that reflects the real you. Does any of this resonate with you guys? Any sort of any other factors that you find confusing about brand and challenging?
I think what's an interesting question, and we chatted about it briefly earlier, is it harder for charities because their mission is their purpose in many ways? So is it harder to articulate that when the service you're delivering is?
I mean, charity's got a number of different kind of challenges. One is yes, a lot of charities feel that, you know, their cause is their purpose, and of course, it's very, very important. But like, for instance, you know, in the cancer space, you know, how many people are in that? In the kind of mental health space, how many people are in that? So I think it's important. That is what I spoke about earlier, is you kind of need to be able to define what is your purpose in there. Is it like Murray Keating, which is about provision of information, you know, that's their kind of core. Or, you know, is it, you know, what is it that you are doing that actually sort of highlights your difference within the space? That's one challenge. But I think the other challenge is culturally, charities are different, because you have people working on the front line, okay, who are, you know, they're seeing all the hard stuff. They're seeing all the individual cases. Okay, you then move into the organization itself, and you might have, for instance, advocacy, which to some degree talks about numbers and follows the political agenda. And then you have fundraising, which actually has got to make those people on the front line, has to tell their story. And a lot of times what happens is they're stigmatizing them. A good case and example is homelessness, and the struggle that Focus Ireland had in relation to, you know, fundraising, stigmatizing those they're trying to help. And actually, you know, and what happens within that dynamic is then those who are working in the front line tend not to communicate back in, and tend not to share the stories of their people. And it's not, I had exactly the same when speaking to people in Barnardo's, exactly the same problem, is the people at the front line, you know, are those who need they need the money, you know, so therefore they want to see resources going directly to the front line. So they've an issue both with fundraising and with business. So trying to get a sense of purpose that everybody buys into, and that everybody understands what it's all about, is really, really important, I think, within the charity to pull those different sectors together. So it's you know, I mean, there are a number of cases I could could go through on that to give you a sense of how that happened and why. But it is a challenge I see, and I've seen in many of the charities I work with, especially when they become bigger. You know, it's all very well when you're like, you know, only 4 or 5 people, but once you're getting into 30, 100, 200, well, then that, you know, those dynamics really come into play.
In terms of sort of the question there, does it resonate? I also think I agree with what you're saying. And I think that tension actually can be really healthy in an organization, can really challenge and
of course
actually enhance internally and externally kind of what you're doing. Like there'll always be that tension maybe between fundraising and communications generally, and how you're what you're saying about what you do. But the other thing that struck me as well is that how much the charity sector has to teach the corporate sector, because this is what we amalgamate the two. Like we have our purposes about, there is a business element to what, you know, we're small businesses, but also we have the purpose of actually the social purpose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that often when I work with business, they say, well, we're not exactly like a charity, so we don't have, you know, that sense of purpose. And I agree.
But that gives us an edge, I think, that we don't maybe make full use of, or we don't see as something that we actually have, we're leaders in relation to that. So
Yes, yes.
a way to view ourselves in a more positive light rather than the kind of
I
little
think
charity trying to emulate the corporate.
I think what the corporates do, and the pressure they're under, because they're in very competitive space, um, they do then have to define their positioning and their purpose very clearly. And that's something that I think the corporates are structurally tend to do better than charities. Charities, because you have a sense of purpose, cause. Sometimes charities don't go in and say, well, actually, how can we be more competitive in our space against our peers? So they're, for attracting funding, for share of mind, and all those different things. I think that, we all know that purpose is important, irrespective of the fact that actually we may find it challenging to get our heads around. And just a few figures to kind of to put some light on that. It's, and these are three separate surveys, and you get very high numbers about people who think that it should be central, it's critical to your success. So, and the reasons that they pull those up are very simple: competitive positioning, loyalty and advocacy, enhanced brand reputation, engagement, innovation, long-term growth, all these different things. And I'll come back to positioning again, because I've mentioned that a few times, but these are kind of some of the things that people actually pull up as being, yeah. Could you just bear with me? I just asked for the noise to be turned down beside me. Just bear a second.
Not his day. I can't hear any noise. Can you?
No.
But if you're there, probably
Yeah,
it's in your own
distracting.
background. Yeah.
Distracting in the back. So when are you going live, Emma? What time shall I check your new website? David, we can't hear any noise, just so you're aware, but it's probably distracting you.
Is a big crew of people who just arrived in, so I just want to let them know to shut the F up. So these are some of the kind of the core whys, and this is I think is important, but the competitive positioning piece is the one that I'm very, very keen on. So I want to just give you a simple definition of what I see as authentic purpose. Okay, something that matters both to you and to your customers, and it's a bond between you organizationally and your customers in a mutual value exchange. Now, essentially for me, that boils down into shared meaning, something that is important to you and that is important to your customers or your target audience. And I mean, this is a very, very simple diagram, but for me, it's very powerful, because if you look at organizations and you think about how they create their sense of purpose and their brand, it tends to be all focused across into the customer and not connected into culture. And this is what I see as being hugely important, is that meaning is shared between customer and culture. That's when you have your authenticity. Okay, it's where people, and again, it's where, somebody within your organization can say very clearly, this is what we do, this is our drive, this is what emotionally gets us going, and that's what is very important for our customers too. Because a lot of time in organizations, not necessarily in charities, but in organizations, the promise and the purpose that's being sort of delivered out into the market is not reflected back in. The culture back internally is about just driving the organization, and is not about actually being customer centric. So this is kind of where, when we, at the top of this, we talked about, this sort of something, a purpose that is authentic to you. This is kind of what we mean. So this meaning, now this is, I think is interesting, doesn't have to be lofty, noble, or remarkable. And this is, again, something which people kind of have a sense when they talk about purposes. Oh, we have to have this huge, lofty sense of purpose. It has to be world-breaking. It has to be about sustainability. It has to be about changing something in society. No, it just has to be something authentic. It's important, of course, organizations do have, the kind of social view, but that's really, if you're talking about core purpose should be something which connects you and your customer, and has to be authentic. I'm just going to tell you a little story, and I'm trying to bring this sense of purpose down to something really, really simple. And I'm going to use a self-storage company that I worked with some years back. A very, this is not a sort of organization that you would actually think, well, okay, how are they going to find their purpose? But they wanted to rebrand because they realized, of course, that they're in a very competitive space. Everybody is just shouting out there. But also they felt that actually because they're a family business, they are different, and they wanted to reflect this through their brand. They didn't ask, for us to define purpose. Purpose became part of the conversation as we went on, but it was important. The process, and Emma, you may have gone through this with your team, is it started with interviews with key people to get a real sense of what was going on in the organization, what they believed in, what was important to them, what was important to their customers, and we spoke to some customers as well. And then that was brought into a series of sessions together, working together to kind of iron things out. What came out was very interesting because there was a common theme that came from all of the conversations. And that theme was that this is an emotional business. And I thought this was very, very interesting because they said that nobody comes into a storage facility to for the fun of it. Everybody who comes in has a story to tell. It is about displacement. It is people who maybe have a divorce, or they're storing granny's furniture or stuff like that. Everybody who comes in. And what was interesting when I spoke to the people is that with all of them, they all got that. And the way in which they engage with customers was to actually sort of to help them overcome whatever it was that they were, if it was a challenge for them, these guys tried to find out why and how it was. And they befriended the people who came in. They asked about their story, asked them why their story, what are they doing, and they got to know them. And this was quite interesting because out of that, they built a kind of a brand story for themselves. Okay. And this is sort of how that story goes. There's a couple of slides. So they realized that the core of their brand was relationships and belongings. Those two different things were actually at the core. Okay. And those two things were very, very important, both internally and externally. And when they thought about kind of things like furniture that people were storing, well, these things had potentially no value, but they were valuable to the people moving them. And they kind of understood that. They also understood the value of belongings from a personal identity point of view. And it was interesting because, some of the case studies they had were people who were storing things like bikes and surfboards and stuff like that. But also, a lot of people who were storing with them were in a difficult situation in their life. From that came, a brand idea. Okay, and I'm just using and that whole idea was based on the fact is that what they're helping people do was transition from one place to another. It wasn't about storage. It wasn't necessarily about putting stuff into boxes. It's about helping people move on. And that was then articulated as make room for life. Now, this is not an external tagline. This is an internal line that actually sort of, and this is what they realize is that actually this is what they're doing. It's not about storage. It's about the benefit that storage gives to people. It's what it is. So that's kind of where they began to find their sense of purpose. And what is interesting is that 5 years later, I went in to kind of interview the CEO and ask him how did it all go? And he said, David, he said, culturally, said it has completely changed the organization. And he said, I was sitting in the boardroom and we have a meeting once a week with all of our team leaders, planning out the week. And we were talking about some aspect of the business, which is around, trying to do something more efficiently. And somebody put their hand up and said, well, that's not very Nesta. Nesta is what they renamed themselves to. And it's interesting that they were being held to account for that sense of purpose internally. Okay. So making room for life is about making room for going family, business, breathe after life's event. And this is how the brand then became. Okay. So they branded to a much more upbeat, friendly type of brand to reflect their sense of purpose. So now what happens is that everything that they do, externally reflects how they have built their brand internally.
David, can I ask where does that sit in the organization? Like, is that the marketing team driving that, or
no? I mean, obviously, they don't have a brand director. But because actually the managing director takes responsibility for it, but the operations director is equally responsible. But when I speak to Kenny, who's the guy on the ground floor, moving boxes, he will actually tell you this. So they do believe that this is what they do. They don't do storage. They're making room for life. And it changes how they engage with people. Okay. So another aspect of kind of, because a lot of this, I mean, it's a nice story and you come up with a nice tagline, but actually, again, I want to come back to how it's making these things actionable. And these are the guys. And what we did with these guys is that, is once we kind of understood, what was at the core of the brand, they then went through an exercise of doing a customer journey from the point of view of people sort of thinking about storage to actually sort of, when they finished and they wrapped up and whatever. And they looked at they identified 10 different kind of what they call touch points. These are key things along that journey. And they had a look at what the person might be thinking and what they're doing and what indeed these guys at Nesta were doing and what could they do differently to actually bring that whole idea of make room for life to life in that engagement. And what happened throughout that is two things, is that they identified a set of core values that underpinned their purpose, but second, an operational plan for every department. And that is, they still use this whole process for building operational plans. So this is a small organization that actually, have completely and utterly sort of understood the sense of purpose and operationalized it. And this is what the managing director said to me 5 years later. And for me, there's nothing more powerful than a culture-driven purpose. And for them, having actually not built any more sites, to have doubled their turnover purely because they were performing better. Okay. Any questions on that before I'll give you the kind of I've given you a practitioner's perspective and a case on that. But before I move on to Harvard, any questions or any comments?
Yeah, no, just I love that one. I think I've seen it before. Maybe it's a few years ago, David. But I think it articulates it really, really well. But one thing that it does compared to its old branding is that, and that strikes me, is that it's inspiring. Like it's inspiring if you work there. It's
Yes.
inspiring because you want to go there. You want to use them. Do you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, and also, I mean, some of the things that they kind of said is, one is this whole thing of somebody's putting their hand up in the boardroom saying that's not very Nesta. So they're holding management to account, holding each other to account for it because they believe in it. So that culture perspective, but also their retention rate, because when I said there was 5 years later I spoke to the managing director, I actually ran more sessions with them because they were now then going to expand their business out into doing business services, and they wanted to know how that brand could extend out to that. And within the room were exactly the same people 5 years. They retained all their staff. So that's another fantastic thing, is that the whole recruitment retention piece.
Yeah.
It's actually very interesting for where we are. I'm in mental health. So what we do is peer support groups for people with mental health. So in terms of the mental health space and funding, we do have a unique selling point, but what we don't have is the what we do is unique, it's strong, it's purposeful, but it's the how we do it is so variegate, as is recovery and mental health. But what this is really showing me is the need to be very clear and consolidate that in order to consolidate the buy-in and that strength of staff and impact. Yeah, so it's actually been really helpful this morning. Thank you, David.
No worries. Not many organizations think about how do they operationalize their brand. It's not, because they do see it as being a promotion vehicle. But if you view it as being a cultural piece, you can see how things like innovation happen much easier. And growth happens easier. It's that whole thing. If you've got a sense of purpose, things become easier. That's how it is in life, It's the same, it's the same in business. So, I mean, Harvard, looked at this whole problem and they came up with this. Okay. They talked about three purpose zones. Because they realized that every organization is different and they may find purpose in a different aspect of who they are. Some will look at it as competence. Okay. And I think a good example of competence would be traditionally the car industry. Okay. Safety, reliability, things that are really important to the customer become very important internally to how they, and Volvo, have, culturally are very aligned to those two things, safety and reliability. My old mentor was the marketing director of Volvo, so he tells me a lot of stories about how they operationalize the whole concept of safety and reliability. So that's, a competence-based one. It could be culture, okay? The intent we run our business and Nesta kind of sit within here. So too would an organization that are very focused on, say, for instance, customer service. Because sometimes it is just customer service that's important to a client, and they want to make sure that they are the best of that, and that defines their purpose. And of course, you have your social good to which we aspire. And what I found interesting about this from Harvard is that it separated out these three different things, because a lot of time people think they have to be all bundled in together. You have to have social good, you have to have competence and culture. And it's helpful for people to look at this and say, well, actually, we kind of fit within one of these three. We don't have to cross into the other two. At risk of flooding with more kind of stuff, I want to talk about purpose and positioning, because again, the first of the list of why you should engage in purpose, was positioning, and I wanted to come back to that, and that's why that's there. And purpose is an idea, a concept that you own inside the mind of your prospect. Okay. So if you think about, safety and reliability, okay, that is something that whenever, I mean, it doesn't matter what age group workshop I run. If I say safety and reliability, people say Volvo. And you don't achieve that, without actually sort of having it operationalized and working on it and knowing and choosing that position, because, that's something which they own. And a lot of companies, when they start off, they're very much about, look, what we have and what we do. Okay. And that's absolutely fine, because, that's where companies start. Okay. And, to some degree, we have a building, we do storage, and if you've got no competition, that's absolutely perfectly fine. Once you get competition in, then you move into the kind of, well, how do we do it? Okay, we have 24-hour access, we have key codes, we have this, we have people on site to help you with forklifts, or as Elephant saying, self-storage, they talk about it being the hotel for your goods or whatever. Where you start getting higher level engagement, okay, when you start moving away from the tangible and rational side on the left and to the emotional side, is who we are and why we do it. And again, why is another one of those kind of big words used in industry. Anybody sort of familiar with Simon Sinek and start with why, and that whole thing is about fact people buy the why, and when you get there, the big difference across the spectrum as a business is that on the right hand side is higher margin, higher differentiation. So that's the early stage competitive and high value differentiation. And if you look at, when we did the initial look at positioning for need more space, they were in the what we have and what we do space. Okay. And the others were in, but nobody was in the kind of why we do it space. And that's the opportunity that we saw when we were working together on this. And that's how Nesta then moved across, and they own that space and still own that space. It's a very highly competitive positioning space for them. It's interesting, when we, talk about charities, a lot of them are actually in the kind of 2, 3, and possibly 4. but 2 and 3, they're stuck in there making, and you know, they're only differentiated by the volume and cleverness of their fundraising. So, and it's when you move yourself into kind of the why you do it, be very clear and have a strong emotional why, that you can get good differentiation. So I'm sort of coming to the end of this, so we can then I can open up to have a bit of a chat and you know, answer any questions you may have. But you know, just to kind of reiterate, you know, it's something that matters to both you and your customers, and it's a bond. And I think, you know, I use these words very carefully because it's not a promotion, it's a bond. Okay, a mutual value exchange. It's about shared meaning. Okay. And when you think about your own organizations, you know, can you articulate what your shared meaning is? You know, do you struggle, or have you got it on the tip of your tongue? Can you explain it to somebody? Because that's something which is really, really important. Okay, so we've probably got 15 minutes. If there's, you know, to answer any questions, to chew anything that you've just seen, or go back and show you again, or whatever you'd like.
Is that a good place to start for Emma and Colette, like that, who we are, what we do, how we do it? Is that a kind of good starting point to unearth this, or in map tracking your competitors and how they do it as well?
Have you guys done that work?
Yeah, we did it quite recently, and the competitor analysis. We've also done it separately as part of a fundraising refresh that we did with Julie and Mantra, from a fundraising perspective. And I think that's really interesting. But just one thing that struck me in your presentation, it was earlier on, it was the use of the word authentic, which I think is really, really vital, and something that in the branding process that we've just undergone, I think we've done a really good job of reflecting. And
Right.
one thing that I think, yeah, we you know, wait to see what other people think, but because it's just been internal to date. But I think one thing that really kind of fed into that authenticity was actually, we were really lucky that the brand refresh, it was done for us by a company called Oliver Ireland. They're a global company, but their Irish based team did this work for us pro bono. And actually the guy who led on it has a very personal experience of a health condition, and really understands what the young people that we work with, some of the challenges, but also, you know, managed to put it in a really very positive way, rather than a sort of, like you mentioned, this a kind of a victim, you know, or with any kind of stigma or anything, but managed to retain the challenges and the difficulties that there are around having a health condition, but also spin it in a way. So there's some language there that we came up with together, but around kind of, you know, helium lets me be more me, like helium's the kind of catalyst that allows me be true to myself as a service user or whatever. And I think that's something that having the authenticity from the person actually developing the brand as well, and really understanding it, has brought it to a different level for us. I think that's my view. So yeah, that authentic piece, and just not trying to overclaim what you're doing, but just say what it is that you're doing and the value that there is around that. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be everything, but what you do is authentic and is real and is true. And that
I think
comes through
that's
so strongly, I think.
Yeah, that's bang. I mean, again, that not overclaiming, not over being, you know, it's real, and you know, that's what people get, you know. Yeah.
Can't wait to see the big reveal.
Oh yeah, and you were asking what time. I don't know, because I think there's still, you know, tweaks and things. So I'm not sure. Probably later today.
What about you, Colette? Have you done any process like this in Grow?
I suppose we're at the opposite end, in that we would have done a rebranding piece probably around 2017 to 18. Then we would have done the work with yourselves in Mantra around our structural changes. We're now at Grow being quite a traditional organization. that has taken a little bit longer to implement. So we're now really at the end of that and the implementation stages in the restructuring. So in terms of fallout, in terms of any evolution from that traditional to the way we need to be now to survive, we're just kind of I'm looking for a nicer, more positive way to put the dark night of the soul, but that's actually what it feels like. So we're just at that now, trying to move staff and move volunteers. So we will actually have to begin now again the stakeholder, right back to stakeholder mapping, right back to redrawing this, and right back to even though we're delivering peer support, what is that in 2025 in a new Ireland and a new volunteer structure, not what we thought we had or what we were, what is there a narrative or what's there a practicality. So we're right back. I'd say we've probably got about another 12 months of the restructuring, and then we're right back to phase one of this. So there's a little bit of awkward growing to go yet and fitting, and then we'll be into like really exciting stuff around this that will, I think, bring us all new energy after what we are trying to process and put into processes at the minute.
Cool. Yeah.
And how connected, obviously, if there's a bit of upheaval, it can be challenging with staff. How connected to purpose do you think they feel?
And that's it. Like the what we do is very, very clear. But at the minute, the how we're doing that, it's like there's an entire kaleidoscope going on nationally in different pockets and with different strata within the organization of what they think it is. So we're trying to focus that into that shared, okay, this is it, this is how we're doing it, and really bringing people on board to that. So you're getting some of what you've led to expect as your experience, but not all of it. And that has to be the way for us to have a clear, smaller, shared, I suppose, delivery, and that we can deliver with more impact. So it's very interesting. It's very busy. It's very tough at the minute, but it's going to be really, really positive.
Yeah, great. No, it sounds like you've got a challenge ahead of you.
Well, I think we're at the tail end of that challenging part. I'm saying another 6 to 12 months. And then I think we'll really get into we'll be consolidated enough to get into let's innovate and grow. But we still have to do that consolidating, that refocusing piece first. And that's just where we're at in the journey. It's really exciting to hear Emma and where they're at, and I suppose that just gives us all the motivation to keep on going.
Oh, and Colette, if you ever want to chat about our journey, I'd be happy to connect with you.
Super. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, it is always a challenge. I think, Julie, you guys at Mantra will have worked with Chime, and I worked with them a number of years ago, and they were going through a very, very painful period where new CEO on board, an organization that was very fragmented. It had different allegiances, and to try and to get people focused, and for them, when they sat down and worked out that there's two core things that they wanted to achieve. One was inclusion, and second is self-determination. And those two things, essentially, once they came down to that, and they wrote again a similar type of brand story that you saw with Nesta. They have had a brand story that tells the story of the customer from a point of view, because the client, customer, whatever, from the point of view of inclusion and self-determination. But it really helped them then when they actually went into a strategic exercise too, to kind of think about, well, then how are we structured, and how are we delivering, and how are we delivering, and what's actually what's the barrier to that? Yeah. Because they did have a lot of barriers at that point in time. So again, it does help to kind of go into that core in order to think about then, well, what does that mean strategically for us as an organization?
What companies have you seen, David, haven't done this so well, where it doesn't feel the authentic, like that they kind of gone too far and got it wrong?
Well, I think everybody, the well, I think the telecoms sort of sector in itself, I will have worked with a number of them, and their whole focus is around churn and acquisition, and not about actually kind of having a deep and meaningful experience. So therefore, a lot of their promises are based upon creating some form of promiscuity when it comes to kind of moving from one to another. So utilities, I think, are very much in that space too. Very difficult to build brands there. And I would have worked for years running the Vodafone account when back in sort of 2010, and it's soul destroying when you're working for an organization that their sole focus is churn and acquisition and not retention. So yeah, but again, I mean, the work I would have done with Focus Ireland, I think that was an organization that that really found a strong sense of purpose, and they had a real challenge. And again, every organization is different. With Focus Ireland, they had Sister Stan at the helm, and she was their moral voice, and they were, as an organization, very much about implementation and business. And then you had the front line. And so they actually had to find their own moral voice through the strategic process, which they did. And to kind of to come and find out, well, what is it that actually motivates us as a team? And they were very successful in doing that, because they were one of those organizations that were very, their front line would not communicate with fundraising. In fact, they were enemies. And as was advocacy. So that was, I mean, when I first created that kind of model of the challenges that charities face, it was based upon what I experienced in Focus Ireland, and Irish Cancer Society. But
big ones.
Yeah. But I mean, Focus Ireland again really did a great job.
We had this is over in Australia, but it still makes me laugh. Aussies love to shorten everything. So the St. Vincent de Paul Society was a bit too long for them all. But the organization was very grounded in the saint because it's Catholic. But so we went through this process to rebrand all the shops so that they'd be looking more professional as Vinnie's, which is what everybody calls the organization in the country. It's Vinnie's to everybody. And there was so much backlash, but we kind of tagged it on to feel good shopping. So it was less about the religious and it was a bit more about, the sustainability. But every state in Australia and territory agreed to this, except WA were always the outlier. So they rebranded their shop St. Vinnie's. So it was so funny. We all had the exact same logo, except in the WA, it was St. Vinnie's. And eventually they changed it to align nationally. But it's just trying to get so many, particularly volunteer organizations, get everyone on that same page is no easy feat. It's something different to everyone.
Yeah.
Amazing. Is there any other questions for David, Colette, or Emma?
Just to say thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Thanks, David. And if anyone's ever interested in talking to David further, probably not you, Emma, for a couple of years, seeing as what you've just gone through, Brandco do some incredible work, and we'd be really happy to put you in touch with David. Or if you're working through Mantra, we'll be working with David as well. And this session is actually an impact culture session again next Wednesday. So one of our input culture sessions. So if there is anybody else in your organization that you'd like to attend, we'll let you know the link to that. But thank you, David. Thank you for taking time out of your holiday. We were laughing earlier when he said, "This isn't my house." So it does have a bit of a Nana vibe to it.
I'll tell you, it's a crazy place. It's
How long are you there for? Do you have a few more?
we go back on Sunday.
Oh, Sunday. Okay, lovely. Well, enjoy.
Yeah, it looks a bit monastic or something in the background.
It used to be a nunnery, yes.
Oh,
did it?
Yeah.
You spotted the religious cues, Colette. Brilliant.
Many a time dossing down in the convent eating buns instead of in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think the nuns would have enjoyed our dinner conversation last night out on the terrace.
If you start to see some spooky things, you'll know why.
Too much altar wine was taken.
No better way on holidays.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Million.
Enjoy
Thanks,
the rest of
David.
your
Take care.
holiday.
Send
Thanks,
you out the
everyone.
link
Thank
later
you.
today.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks, David. Enjoy
Bye-bye.
your holidays.
Bye.
Sorry about the tech problems. It's always the way, isn't it? When you've
It worked out okay.